Alright, we are pushing 8 o'clock. I just sat down, popped a fresh bottle of wine. Cat's feeling better tonight, so I think we are in a good place to start. Welcome back, everyone. This is our fourth night of reading from Walden's Thoreau. So we will see how things go from here on out. I'm still pretty firm in my opinion that after the first night, this has gotten a lot better. The first chapter of the book is insufferable and pedantic and narcissistic and just stream of consciousness bullshit. But it seems to have gotten a little bit better. We have a few more opinions that we can agree with Thoreau on. He still presents them in an insufferable way. But, yeah, they're not all bad ideas. They're just poorly said. He still needs an editor, dramatically. I'm looking at the first page of the next section, or the next chapter, and the entire page is one paragraph. So that's a thing. But yeah, so everybody's doing better around the house. Little Mr. Simba decided that he just needed to throw up once or twice and have a nice little afternoon of sitting around and being pampered, and then he's back to normal, annoying his sister and getting all up in the middle of everything, as it should be. So, let's go ahead and jump right back into things here, so we will just see what's been going on in and around Walden Pond. See if Thoreau is still going to annoy us, or going to somehow salvage himself from the absolute mess that is his delivery, shall we say. Alright, so our next chapter, just south of halfway through the book, is The Village. After hoeing, or perhaps reading and writing, in the forenoon. Quick break. I love forenoon. Everyone says afternoon. That's great. But what do you call that time that it's not quite noon yet, but it's not afternoon, but it's just like midday forenoon. I like that. After hoeing, or perhaps reading and writing in the forenoon, I usually bathed again in the pond, swimming across one of its coves for a stint, and washed the dust of labor from my person, or smoothed out the last wrinkle which study had made, and for the afternoon was absolutely free. Every day or two I strolled to the village to hear some of the gossip which is incessantly going on there, circulating either from mouth to mouth or from newspaper to newspaper, and which, taken in homeopathic doses, was really as refreshing in its way as the rustle of leaves and the peeping of frogs. As I walked in the woods to see the birds and squirrels, so I walked in the village to see the men and boys. Instead of the wind among the pines, I heard the carts rattle. In one direction from my house there was a colony of muskrats in the river meadows. Under the grove of elms and buttonwoods in the other horizon was a village of busy men, as curious to me as if they had been prairie dogs, each sitting at the mouth of its burrow, or running over to a neighbor's to gossip. I went there frequently to observe their habits. The village appeared to me a great newsroom, and on one side, to support it, as once at Redding and Company's on State Street, they kept nuts and raisins, or salt and meal and other groceries. Some have such a vast appetite for the former commodity, that is, the news, and such sound digestive organs that they can sit forever in public avenues without stirring, and let it simmer and whisper through them like the Etesian winds, or as if inhaling either, it only producing numbness and insensibility to pain. Otherwise it would often be painful to hear, without affecting the consciousness. I hardly ever failed, when I rambled through the village, to see a row of such worthies, either sitting on a ladder sunning themselves, with their bodies inclined forward and their eyes glancing along the line this way and that, from time to time with a voluptuous expression, or else leaning against a barn with their hands in their pockets, like caryatides, as if to prop it up. They, being commonly out of doors, heard whatever was in the wind. These are the coarsest mills, in which all gossip is finely digested or cracked up before it is emptied into finer and more delicate hoppers within doors. I observed that the vitals of the village were the grocery, the bar-room, the post office, and the bank, and, as a necessary part of the machinery, they kept a bell, a big gun, and a fire engine at convenient places, and the houses were so arranged as to make the most of mankind, in lanes and fronting one another, so that every traveler had to run the gauntlet, and every man, woman, and child might get a lick at him. Of course, those who were stationed nearest to the head of the line, where they could most see and be seen, and have the first blow at him, paid the highest prices for their places, and the few straggling inhabitants in the outskirts, where long gaps in the line began to occur, and the traveler could get over walls or turn aside into cow paths and so escape, paid a very slight ground or window tax. Signs were hung out on all sides to allure him, some to catch him by the appetite, as the tavern and victualling cellar, some by the fancy, as the dry goods store and the jewelers, and others by the hair or the feet or the skirts, as the barber, the shoemaker, or the tailor. Besides, there was a still more terrible standing invitation to call at every one of these houses, and company expected about these times. For the most part, I escaped wonderfully from these dangers, either by proceeding at once boldly and without deliberation to the goal, as is recommended to those who run the gauntlet, or by keeping my thoughts on high things, like Orpheus, who, loudly singing the praises of the gods to his lyre, drowned the voices of the sirens, and kept out of danger. Sometimes I bolted suddenly, and nobody could tell my whereabouts, for I did not stand much about gracefulness, and never hesitated at a gap in a fence. I was even accustomed to make an irruption into some houses, where I was well entertained, and after learning the kernels and the vast last sieveful news of news, what had subsided, the prospects of war and peace, and whether the world was likely to hold together much longer, I was let out through the rear avenues, and so escaped to the woods again. That was all one paragraph. Thoreau, please. Henry. Honestly. It was very pleasant, when I stayed late in town, to launch myself into the night, especially if it was dark and tempestuous, and set sail from some bright village parlor or lecture room, with a bag of rye or Indian meal upon my shoulder, for my snug harbor in the woods, having made all tight without and withdrawn under latches with a merry crew of thoughts, leaving only my outer man at the helm, or even tying up at the helm when it was plain sailing. I had many a genial thought by the cabin fire as I sailed. I was never cast away nor distressed in any weather, though I encountered some severe storms. It is darker in the woods, even in common nights, than most suppose. I frequently had to look up at the opening between the trees above the path in order to learn my route, and, when there was no cart path, to feel with my feet the faint track which I had worn, or steer by the known relation of particular trees, which I felt in my hands, passing between two pines, for instance, not more than 18 inches apart, in the midst of the woods, invariably in the darkest night. Sometimes, after coming home thus late in a dark and muggy night, when my feet felt the path which my eyes could not see, dreaming and absent-minded all the way, until I was aroused by having to raise my hand to lift the latch, I have not been able to recall a single step of my walk, and I have thought that, perhaps, my body would find its way home if its master should forsake it, as the hand finds its way to the mouth without assistance. Several times, when a visitor chanced to stay into evening, and it proved a dark night, I was obliged to conduct him to the cart path in the rear of the house, and then point out to him the direction he was to pursue, and in keeping which he was to be guided rather by his feet than his eyes. One very dark night, I directed thus on their way 2 young men who had been fishing in the pond. They lived about a mile off through the woods, and were quite used to the route. A day or two after, one of them told me that they had wandered about the greater part of the night, close by their own premises, and did not get home till toward morning, by which time, as there had been several heavy showers in the meanwhile, and the leaves were very wet, they were drenched to their skins. I've heard of many going astray even in the village streets, when the darkness was so thick you could cut it with a knife, as the saying is. Some who live in the outskirts, having come to town a-shopping in their wagons, have been obliged to put up for the night, and gentlemen and ladies making a call have gone half a mile out of their way, feeling the sidewalk only with their feet and not knowing when they turned. It is a surprising and memorable, as well as valuable experience, to be lost in the woods any time. Often, in a snowstorm. Even by day, one will come out upon a well-known road and yet find it impossible to tell which way leads to the village. Though he knows that he has traveled it 1,000 times, he cannot recognize a feature in it, but it is as strange to him as if it was a road in Siberia. By night, of course, the perplexity is infinitely greater. In our most trivial walks, we are constantly, though unconsciously, steering like pilots by certain well-known beacons and headlands. And if we go beyond our usual course, we will carry in our minds the bearing of some neighboring cape, and not till we are completely lost or turned around, for a man needs only to be turned around once with his eyes shut in this world to be lost, do we appreciate the vastness and strangeness of nature. Every man has to learn the points of compass again as often as he awakes, whether from sleep or any abstraction. Not till we are lost. In other words, not till we have lost the world do we begin to find ourselves, and realize that where we are and the infinite extent of our relations. One afternoon, near the end of the first summer, when I had went to the village to get a shoe from the cobbler's, I was seized and put into jail because, as I have elsewhere related, I did not pay a tax to, or recognize the authority of, the state which buys and sells men, women, and children, like cattle at the door of its senate house. Okay, hold on. So Thoreau is a sovereign citizen, just doesn't recognize it? I knew this man was... Ay. I had gone down to the woods for other purposes, but wherever a man goes, men will pursue and paw him with their dirty institutions, and, if they can, constrain him to belong to their desperate odd-fellow society. It is true, I might have resisted forcibly, with more or less effect, might have run amok against society, but I preferred that society should run amok against me, it being the desperate party. However, I was released the next day, obtained my mended shoe, and returned to the woods in season to get my dinner of huckleberries on Fairhaven Hill. I was never molested by any person, but those who represented the state. I had no lock nor bolt but for the desk, which held my papers, not even a nail to put over my latch or windows. I never fastened my door night or day, though I was to be absent several days. Not even when the next fall I spent a fortnight in the woods of Maine, and yet my house was more respected than if it had been surrounded by a file of soldiers. The tired rambler could rest and warm himself by my fire, the literary amuse himself with the few books on my table, or the curious, by opening my closet door, see what was left of my dinner, and what prospect I had of a supper. Yet, though many people of every class came this way to the pond, I suffered no serious inconvenience from these sources, and I never missed anything but one small book, a volume of Homer, which perhaps was improperly gilded, and this I trust a soldier of our camp has found by this time. I am convinced that if all men were to live as simply as I then did, thieving and robbery would be unknown. These take place only in communities where some have got more than insufficient, while others have not enough. The Pope's Homers would soon get properly distributed. Nec bella fuerunt, faginis astabat dum sickfis ante debis. Nor wars did men molest, when only beechen and bowls were in request. You who govern public affairs, what need have you to employ punishments? Love virtue, and the people will be virtuous. The virtues of a superior man are like the wind. The virtues of a common man are like the grass. The grass, when the wind passes over it, bends. That brings us to the end of that chapter. It's a quick, short, quick one there. Was going all fine and dandy, talking about the gossip in the village, and then just in passing, oh, I don't recognize the power of the state. No, they've got no rights over me. Oh, for Christ's sake, Henry. All right. Now the next one seems to be a little bit of a doozy. It's about 4 times as long, but it seems like this one's broken up into at least a few paragraphs. I can see spaces on the page, places where I can breathe. It's amazing. And so our next chapter is the ponds. Oh, I'm not driving, I'm traveling. That's a doozy. All right, the ponds. Sometimes, having a surefit of human society and gossip, and Worn out all my village friends, I rambled still farther westward than I habitually dwell, into yet more unfrequented parts of the town, to fresh woods and pastures new. Or, while the sun was setting, made my supper of huckleberries and blueberries on Fairhaven Hill, and laid up a store for several days. The fruits do not yield their true flavor to the purchaser of them, nor to him who raises them for the market. There is but one way to obtain it, yet few take that way. If you would know the flavor of huckleberries, ask the cowboy, or the partridge. It is a vulgar error to suppose that you have tasted huckleberries who never plucked them. A huckleberry never reaches Boston. They have not been known there since they grew on our 3 hills. The ambrosial and essential part of the fruit is lost with the bloom, which is rubbed off in the market cart, or they become mere provender. As long as eternal justice reigns, not one innocent huckleberry can be transported thither from the country's hills. Alright, so he's got a little bit of a point. If you've ever found a berry bush and just plucked it straight off the bush and popped a few, that's about as good as they get. Occasionally, after my hoeing was done for the day, I joined some impatient companion who had been fishing on the pond since morning, as silent and motionless as a duck or a floating leaf, and after practicing various kinds of philosophy, had concluded commonly, by the time I arrived, that he belonged to the ancient sect of Cenobites. There was one older man, an excellent fisher and skilled in all kinds of woodcraft, who was pleased to look upon my house as a building erected for the convenience of fishermen, and I was equally pleased when he sat in my doorway to arrange his lines. Once in a while we sat together on the pond, he at one end of the boat and I at the other, but not in many words passed between us, for he had grown deaf in his later years, but he occasionally hummed a song, which harmonized well enough with my philosophy. Our intercourse was thus altogether one of unbroken harmony, far more pleasing to remember than if it had been carried on by speech. When, as was commonly the case, I had none to commune with, I used to raise the echoes by striking with a paddle on the side of my boat, filling the surrounding woods with circling and dilating sound, stirring them up as the keeper of a menagerie his wild beasts, until I elicited a growl from every wooded vale and hillside. In warm evenings, I frequently sat in the boat, playing the flute, and saw the perch, which I seemed to have charmed, hovering around me, and the moon traveling over the ribbed bottom, which was strewed with wrecks of the forest. Formerly, I had come to this pond adventurously, from time to time, in dark summer nights, with a companion, and making a fire close to the water's edge, which we thought attracted the fishes. We caught pouts with a bunch of worms strung on a thread, and when we had done, far into the night, threw the burning brands high into the air like skyrockets, which, coming down into the pond, were quenched with a loud hissing, and we were suddenly groping in total darkness. Through this, whistling a tune, we took our way to the haunts of men again. But now, I had made my home by the shore. Sometimes, after staying in a village parlor till the family had all retired, I have returned to the woods and, partly with a view to the next day's dinner, spent the hours of midnight fishing from a boat by moonlight, serenaded by owls and foxes, and hearing, from time to time, the creaking note of some unknown bird close at hand. These experiences were very memorable and valuable to me, anchored in 40 feet of water and 20 or 30 rods from the shore, surrounded sometimes by thousands of small perch and shiners, dimpling the surface with their tails in the moonlight, and communicating by a long flaxen line with mysterious nocturnal fishes, which had their dwelling 40 feet below, or sometimes dragging 60 feet of line about the pond as I drifted in the gentle night breeze, now and then feeling a slight vibration along it, indicative of some life prowling about its extremity, of dull, uncertain, blundering purpose there, and slow to make up its mind. At length you slowly raise, pulling hand over hand, some horned pout squeaking and squirming to the upper air. It was very queer, especially in dark nights, when your thoughts had wandered to vast and cosmogonal themes in other spheres, to feel this faint jerk, which came to interrupt your dreams and link you to nature again. It seemed as if I might next cast my line upward into the air, as well as downward into this element, which was scarcely more dense. Thus I caught 2 fishes, as it were, with one hook. The scenery of Walden is on a humble scale, and though very beautiful, does not approach to grandeur, nor can it much concern one who has not long frequented it, or lived by its shore. Yet this pond is so remarkable for its depth and purity as to merit a particular description. It is a clear and deep green well, half a mile long and 1.75 miles in circumference. It contains about 61.5 acres, a perennial spring in the midst of pine and oak woods, without any visible inlet or outlet except by the clouds and evaporation. The surrounding hills rise abruptly from the water to the height of 40 to 80 feet, though on the southeast and east they attain to about 100 and 150 feet respectively, within 1/4 and 1/3 of a mile. They are exclusively woodland. All our Concord waters have two colors at least, one when viewed at a distance, and another, more proper, close at hand. The first depends more on the light and follows the sky. In clear weather, in summer, they appear blue at a little distance, especially if agitated, and at a great distance all appear alike. In stormy weather they are sometimes of a dark slate color. The sea, however, is said to be blue one day and green another, without any perceptible change in the atmosphere. I've seen our river, when, the landscape being covered with snow, both water and ice were almost as green as grass. Some consider blue to be the color of pure water, whether liquid or solid, but looking directly down into our waters from a boat, they are seen to be of very different colors. Walden is blue at one time and green at another, even from the same point of view. Lying between the earth and the heavens, it partakes of the color of both. Viewed from a hilltop, it reflects the color of the sky, but near at hand it is of a yellowish tint, next to the shore where you can see the sand. Then a light green, which gradually deepens to a uniform dark green in the body of the soul. In some lights, viewed even from a hilltop, it is of a vivid green next to the shore. Some have referred to this to the reflection of the verdure, but it is equally green there against the railroad sandbank, and in the spring, before the leaves are expanded, and it may be simply the result of the prevailing blue mixed with the yellow of the sand. Such is the color of its iris. This is that portion also, where in the spring the ice, being warmed by the heat of the sun, reflected from the bottom, and also transmitted through the earth, melts first and forms a narrow canal about the still frozen middle. Like the rest of our waters, when much agitated in clear weather, so that the surface of the waves may reflect the sky at the right angle, or because there is more light mixed with it, it appears at a little distance of a darker blue than the sky itself, and at such time, being on its surface, and looking with divided vision so as to see the reflection, I have discerned a matchless and indescribable light blue, such as watered or changeable silks and sword blades suggest, more cerulean than the sky itself, alternating with the original dark green on the opposite sides of the waves, which last appeared but muddy in comparison. It is a vitreous, greenish blue, as I remember it, like those patches of the winter sky seen through cloud vistas in the west before sundown. Yet a single glass of its water held up to the light is as colorless as an equal quantity of air. It is well known that a large plate of glass will have a green tint, owing, as the makers say, to its body, but a small piece of the same will be colorless. How large a body of Walden water would be required to reflect a green tint, I have never proved. The water of our river is black or a very dark brown to one looking directly down on it, and like that of most ponds, imparts to the body of one bathing in it a yellowish tinge. But this water is of such crystalline purity that the body of the bather appears of an alabaster whiteness, still more unnatural, which, as the limbs are magnified and distorted withal, produces a monstrous effect, making fit studies for Michelangelo. The water is so transparent that the bottom can easily be discerned at the depth of 25 or 30 feet. Paddling over it, you may see many feet beneath the surface the schools of perch and shiners, perhaps only an inch long, yet the former easily distinguished by their transverse bars, and you think that they must be ascetic fish that find a subsistence there. Once in the winter, many years ago, when I had been cutting holes through the ice in order to catch pickerel, as I stepped ashore, I tossed my axe back onto the ice, but as if some evil genius had directed it, it slid 4 or 5 rods directly into one of the holes, where the water was 25 feet deep. Out of curiosity, I laid down on the ice and looked through the hole, until I saw the axe a little on one side, standing on its head, with its helve erect and gently swaying to and fro with the pulse of the pond. And there it might have stood erect and swaying till in the course of time the handle rotted off, if I had not disturbed it, making another hole directly over it with an ice chisel which I had, and cutting down the longest birch which I could find in the neighborhood with my knife. I made a slip noose, which I attached to its end, and letting it down carefully, passed it over the knob of the handle, and drew it by a line along the birch, and so pulled the axe out again. The shore is composed of a belt of smooth, rounded white stones, like paving stones, excepting one or two short sand beaches, and is so steep that in many places a single leap will carry you into water over your head, and were it not for its remarkable transparency, that would be the last to be seen of its bottom till it rose on the opposite side. Some think it is bottomless. It is nowhere muddy, and a casual observer would say that there were no weeds at all in it, and of noticeable plants, except in the little meadows recently overflowed, which do not properly belong to it. A closer scrutiny does not detect a flag nor a bulrush, nor even a lily, yellow or white, but only a few small heart leaves and potamogatons, and perhaps a water target or two, all which, however, a bather might not perceive. And these plants are clean and bright like the element they grow in. The stones extend a rod or two into the water, and then the bottom is pure sand, except in the deepest parts, where there is usually a little sediment, probably from the decay of the leaves, which have been wafted onto it so many successive falls. And a bright green weed is brought up on anchors, even in midwinter. We have one other pond, just like this, White Pond, a 9-acre corner, about 2.5 miles westerly, but though I am acquainted with most of the ponds within a dozen miles of this center, I do not know a third of this pure and well-liked character. Successive nations, perchance, have drank at, admired, and fathomed it, and passed away. And still its water is green and pellucid as ever, not an intermitting spring. Perhaps on that spring morning when Adam and Eve were driven out of Eden, Walden Pond was already in existence, and even then breaking up in a gentle spring rain accompanied with mist and a southerly wind, and covered with myriads of ducks and geese, which had not heard of the fall, when still such pure lakes sufficed them. Even then it had commenced to rise and fall, and had clarified its waters and colored them of the hue they now wear, and obtained a patent of heaven to be the only Walden Pond in the world, and distiller of celestial dews. Who knows in how many unremembered nations' literatures this has been the Castalian fountain, or what nymphs presided over it in the Golden Age. It is a gem of the first water which Concord wears in her coronet. Yet, perchance, the first who came to this well have left some trace of their footsteps. I have been surprised to detect, encircling the pond, even where thick wood has been cut down on the shore, a narrow, shelf-like path in the steep hillside, alternately rising and falling, approaching and receding from the water's edge, as old, probably, as the race of man here, worn by feet of aboriginal hunters, to one standing on the middle of the pond in winter, just after a light snow has fallen, appearing as clear, undulating white line, unobscured by weeds and twigs, and very obvious a quarter of a mile off in many places where in summer it is hardly distinguishable close at hand. The snow reprints it, as it were, in clear white type alto relievo. The ornamented grounds of villas which will one day be built here may still preserve some trace of this. The pond rises and falls, but whether regularly or not, and within that period nobody knows, though, as usual, many pretend to know. It is commonly higher in the winter and lower in the summer, though not corresponding to the general wet and dryness. I can remember when it was a foot or two lower, and also when it was at least 5 feet higher than when I lived by it. There is a narrow sandbar running into it, with very deep water on one side, on which I helped boil a kettle of chowder, some 6 rods from the main shore, about the year 1824, which has not been possible to do for 25 years. And on the other hand, my friends used to listen with incredulity when I told them that a few years later, I was accustomed to fish from a boat in a secluded cove in the woods, 15 rods from the only shore they knew, which place was long since converted into a meadow. But the pond has risen steadily for 2 years, and now, in the summer of '52, is just 5 feet higher than when I lived there, or as high as it was 30 years ago, and fishing goes on again in the meadow. This makes a difference of level, at the outside of 6 or 7 feet, and yet the water shed by the surrounding hills is insignificant in amount, and this overflow must be referred to causes which affect the deep springs. This same summer the pond has begun to fall again. It is remarkable that this fluctuation, whether periodical or not, appears thus to require many years for its accomplishment. I have observed one rise and a part of 2 falls, and I expect that a dozen or 15 years hence the water will again be as low as I have ever known it. Flint's Pond, a mile eastward, allowing for the disturbance occasioned by its inlets and outlets, and the smaller intermediate ponds also sympathize with Walden, and recently attained their greatest height at the same time with the latter. The same is true, as far as my observation goes, of White Pond. The rise and fall of Walden at long intervals serves this use at least. The water standing at this great height for a year or more, though it makes it difficult to walk round, kills the shrubs and trees, which have sprung up about its edge since the last rise. Pitch pines, birches, alders, aspens, and others, and falling again, leaves an unobstructed shore. For unlike many ponds, and all waters which are subject to a daily tide, its shore is cleanest when the water is lowest. On the side of the pond next my house, a row of pitch pines 15 feet high has been killed and tipped over as if by a lever, and thus a stop put to their encroachments. And their size indicates how many years have elapsed since the last rise to this height. By this fluctuation the pond asserts its title to a shore, and thus the shore is shorn, and the trees cannot hold it by right of possession. These are the lips of the lake on which no beard grows. It licks its chaps from time to time. When the water is at its height, the alders, willows, and maple trees send forth a mass of fibrous red roots several feet long from all sides of their stems in the water, and to the height of 3 or 4 feet from the ground, in the effort to maintain themselves. I have known the high blueberry bushes about the shore, which commonly produce no fruit, bear an abundant crop under these circumstances. Some have been puzzled to tell how the shore became so regularly paved. My townsmen have all heard the tradition. The oldest people tell me they heard it in their youth, that anciently the Indians were holding a powwow upon a hill there, which rose as high into the heavens as the pond now sinks down into the earth. And they used much profanity, as the story goes, though this vice is one of which the Indians were never guilty. And while they were thus engaged, the hill shook and suddenly sank, and only one old squaw, named Walden, escaped, and from her the pond was named. It has been conjectured that when the hill shook, these stones rolled down its side and became the present shore. It is very certain, at any rate, that once there was no pond here, and now there is one, and this Indian fable does not in any respect conflict with the account of that ancient settler whom I have mentioned, who remembers so well when he first came here with his divining rod, saw a thin vapor rising from the sward, and the hazel pointed steadily downward, and he concluded to dig a well here. As for the stones, many still think that they are hardly to be accounted for by the action of the waves on these hills. But I observe that the surrounding hills are remarkably full of the same kind of stones, so that they have been obliged to pile them up on the walls of both sides of the railroad cut nearest the pond. And moreover, there are most stones where the shore is most abrupt, so that, unfortunately, it is no longer a mystery to me. I detect the paver, if the name was not derived from that of some English locality, Saffron Walden, for instance. One might suppose that it was called originally Walled-in Pond. The pond was my well ready dug. For 4 months in the year its water is as cold as it is pure at all times, and I think it is then as good as any, if not the best, in the town. In the winter, all water which is exposed to the air is colder than springs and wells which are protected from it. The temperature of the pond water, which had stood in the room where I sat 5 o'clock in the afternoon till noon the next day, the 6th of March, 1846, the thermometer having been up to 65 or 70 degrees some of the time, owing partly to the sun of the roof, was 42 degrees, or 1 degree cooler the water of one of the coldest wells in the village just drawn. The temperature of the boiling spring the same day was 45 degrees, or the warmest of any water tried, though it is the coldest that I know of in summer, when, beside, shallow and stagnant surface water is not mingled with it. Moreover, in summer, Walden never becomes so warm as most water that is exposed to the sun, on account of its depth. In the warmest weather, I usually placed a pailful in my cellar, where it became cool in the night, and remained so during the day. Though I also resorted to a spring in the neighborhood, it was as good when a week old as the day it was dipped, and had no taste of the pump. Whoever camps for a week in summer by the shore of a pond needs only bury a pail of water a few feet deep in the shade of his camp to be independent of the luxury of ice. There have been caught in Walden pickerel, one weighing 7 pounds, to say nothing of another which carried off a reel with its great velocity, which the fisherman safely set down at 8 pounds because he did not see him, perch and pounce, some of each weighing over 2 pounds, shiners, chivins, roach, Lucius pulchellus, a very few breams, and a couple of eels, one weighing 4 pounds. I am thus particular because the weight of a fish is commonly its only title to fame, and these are the only eels I have heard of here. Also, I have a faint recollection of a little fish, some 5 inches long, with silvery sides and a greenish back, somewhat dace-like in character, which I mention here chiefly to link my facts to fable. Nevertheless, this pond is not very fertile in fish. Its pickerel, though not abundant, are its chief boast. I have seen at one time lying in the ice pickerel of at least 3 different kinds: a long and shallow one, a steel-colored, most like those caught in the river, a bright golden kind with greenish reflections and remarkably deep, which is the most common here, and another, golden-colored and shaped like the last, but peppered on the sides with small dark brown or black spots, intermixed with a few faint blood-red ones, very much like a trout. The specific name, reticulatus, would not apply to this. It would be gutulatus, rather. These are all very firm fish, and weigh more than their size promises. The shiners, pouts, and perch also are indeed all fishes which inhabit this pond, are much cleaner, handsomer, and firmer fleshed than those in the river and most other ponds, as the water is purer, and they can easily be distinguished from them. Probably many ichthyologists would make new varieties of some of them. There are also a clean race of frogs and tortoises, and a few mussels in it. Muskrats and minks leave their traces about it, and occasionally a traveling mud turtle visits it. Sometimes, when I pushed off my boat in the morning, I disturbed a great mud turtle which had secreted itself under the boat in the night. Ducks and geese frequent it in the spring and fall, and the white-bellied swallows, Hirundobicon, skim over it, and the peetweets, Totanus macularius, teeter, along its stony shores all summer. I have sometimes disturbed a fishhawk sitting on a white pine over the water, but I doubt if it ever profaned by the wing of a gull, like Fairhaven. At most, it tolerates 1 annual loon. These are all the animals of consequence which frequent it now. You may see from a boat, in calm weather, near the sandy eastern shore, where the water is 8 or 10 feet deep, and also in some other parts of the pond, some circular heaps half a dozen feet in diameter by a foot in height, consisting of small stones less than a hen's egg in size, where all round is bare sand. At first you wonder if the Indians could have formed them on the ice for any purpose, and so, when the ice melted, they sank to the bottom. But these are too regular, and some of them plainly too fresh for that. They are similar to those found in rivers, but as there are no suckers nor lampreys here, I know not by what fish they could be made. Perhaps they are the nest of the chivin. These lend a pleasing mystery to the bottom. The shore is irregular enough not to be monotonous. I have in my mind's eye the western indented with deep bays, the bolder northern and the beautifully scalloped southern shore, where successive capes overlap each other and suggest unexplored coves between. The forest has never so good a setting, nor is so distinctly beautiful as when seen from the middle of a small lake amid hills, which rise from the water's edge, for the water, in which it is reflected, not only makes the best foreground in such a case, but with its winding shore, the most natural and agreeable boundary to it. There is no rawness nor imperfection in its edge there, as where the axe has cleared apart, or a cultivated field abuts on it. The trees have ample room to expand on the waterside, and each sends forth its most vigorous branch in that direction. There, nature has woven a natural selvage, and the eye rises by just gradations from the low shrubs of the shore to the highest trees. There are few traces of man's hand to be seen. The water leaves the shore as it did 1,000 years ago. A lake is in the landscape's most beautiful and expressive feature. It is Earth's eye, looking into which the beholder measures the depth of his own nature. The fluviatile trees next to the shore are the slender eyelashes which fringe it, and the wooded hills and cliffs around are its overhanging brows. Standing on the smooth, sandy beach at the east end of the pond, in a calm September afternoon, when a slight haze makes the opposite shoreline indistinct, I have seen whence came the expression, the glassy surface of a lake. When you invert your head, it looks like a thread of finest gossamer, stretched across the valley and gleaming against the distant pine woods, separating one stratum of the atmosphere from another. You would think that you could walk dry under it to the opposite hills, and that the swallows which skim over might perch on it. Indeed, they sometimes dive below this line, as it were by mistake, and are undeceived. As you look over the pond westward, you are obliged to employ both your hands to defend your eyes against the reflected as well as the true sun, for they are equally bright, and if between the two you survey its surface critically, it is literally as smooth as glass, except where the skater insects, at equal intervals scattered over its whole extent, by their motions in the sun produce the finest imaginable sparkle on it, or, perchance, a duck plumes itself, or, as I have said, a swallow skims so low as to touch it. It may be that in the distance a fish describes an arc of 3 or 4 feet in the air, and there's one bright flash where it emerges, and another where it strikes the water. Sometimes the whole silvery arc is revealed, or here and there, perhaps, is a thistledown floating on its surface, which the fishes dart at and so dimple it again. It is like molten glass, cooled but not congealed, and the few motes in it are pure and beautiful, like the imperfections in glass. You may often detect a yet smoother and darker water, separated from the rest as if by an invisible cobweb, boom of the water nymphs resting on it. From a hilltop, you can see a fish leap in almost any part of it, for not a pickerel or shiner picks an insect from the smooth surface, but it manifestly disturbs the equilibrium of the whole lake. It is wonderful with what elaborateness this simple fact is advertised. This piscine murder will out, and from my distant perch I distinguish the circulating undulations when they are half a dozen rods in diameter. And you can even detect a water bug, Chirinus, ceaselessly progressing over the smooth surface a quarter of a mile off, for they furrow the water slightly, making a conspicuous ripple bounded by two diverging lines, but the skaters glide over it without rippling it perceptibly. When the surface is considerably agitated, and there are no skaters nor water bugs on it, but apparently, in calm days, they leave their havens, and adventurously glide forth from the shore by short impulses, till they completely cover it. It is a soothing employment, on one of those fine days in the fall when all the warmth of the sun is fully appreciated, to sit on a stump on such a height as this, overlooking the pond, and study the dimpling circles which are incessantly inscribed on its otherwise invisible surface, amid the reflected skies and trees. Over this great expanse there is no disturbance, but it is thus at once gently smoothed away and assuaged, as when a vase of water is jarred. The trembling circles seek the shore, and all is smooth again. Not a fish can leap or an insect fall on this pond, but it is thus reported in circling dimples, in lines of beauty, as it were the constant welling up of its fountain. The gentle pulsing of its life, the heaving of its breast, the thrills of joy and thrills of pain are undistinguishable. How peaceful the phenomena of the lake! Again the works of man shine as in the spring. Aye, every leaf and twig and stone and cobweb sparkles now at mid-afternoon, as when covered with dew in a spring morning. Every motion of an oar or an insect produces a flash of light, and if an oar falls, how sweet the echo! In such a day, in September or October, Walden is a perfect forest mirror. set round with stones as precious to my eye as if fewer or rarer. Nothing so fair, so pure, and at the same time so large as a lake perchance lies on the surface of the earth. Sky water, it needs no fence. Nations come and go without defiling it. It is a mirror which no stone can crack, whose quicksilver will never wear off, whose gilding nature continually repairs. No storms, no dust can dim its surface ever fresh. A mirror in which all impurity presented to it sinks, swept and dusted by the sun's hazy brush. This is the light dust cloth, which retains no breath that is breathed on it, but sends its own to float as clouds high above its surface, and be reflected in its bosom still. A field of water betrays the spirit that is in the air. It is continually receiving new life and motion from above. It is intermediate in its nature, between land and sky. On land only the grass and trees wave, but the water itself is rippled by the wind. I see where the breeze dashes across it by the streaks or flakes of light. It is remarkable that we can look down on its surface. We shall, perhaps, look down thus on the surface of air at length, and mark where a still subtler spirit sweeps over it. The skaters and water bugs finally disappear in the latter part of October, when the severe frosts have come. And then, and in November, usually, in a calm day, there is absolutely nothing to ripple the surface. One November afternoon, in the calm at the end of a rainstorm of several days' duration, when the sky was still completely overcast and the air was full of mist, I observed that the pond was remarkably smooth, so that it was difficult to distinguish its surface, though it no longer reflected the bright tints of October, but the somber November colors of the surrounding hills. Though I passed over it as gently as possible, the slight undulations produced by my boat extended almost as far as I could see, and gave a ribbed appearance to the reflections. But as I was looking over the surface, I saw here and there at a distance a faint glimmer, as if some skater insects which had escaped the frost might be collected there, or, perchance, the surface, being so smooth, betrayed where a spring welled up from the bottom. Paddling gently to one of these places, I was surprised to find myself surrounded by myriads of small perch, about 5 inches long, of a rich bronze color in the green water, sporting there, and constantly rising to the surface and dimpling it, sometimes leaving bubbles on it. In such transparent and seemingly bottomless water, reflecting the clouds, I seemed to be floating through the air as in a balloon, and their swimming impressed me as a kind of flight or hovering, as if they were a compact flock of birds passing just beneath the level on the right or left, near like their fins like sails all set around them. There were many such schools in the pond, apparently approving the short season before winter would draw in an icy shutter over their broad skylight, sometimes giving to the surface an appearance as if a slight breeze struck it, or a few raindrops fell there. When I approached carelessly and alarmed them, they made a sudden splash and rippling with their tails, as if one had struck the water with a brushy bough, and instantly took refuge in the depths. At length, the wind rose, the mist increased, and the waves began to run, and the perch leaped much higher than before, half out of water, 100 black points 3 inches long at once above the surface. Even as late as the 5th of December, one year I saw some dimples on the surface, and thinking it was going to rain hard immediately, the air being full of mist, I made haste to take my place at the oars and row homeward. Already the rain seemed rapidly increasing, though I felt none on my cheek, and I anticipated a thorough soaking. But suddenly the dimples ceased, for they were produced by the perch, which the noise of my oars had seared into the depths, and I saw their schools dimly disappearing. So I spent a dry afternoon after all. An old man who used to frequent this pond nearly 60 years ago, when it was dark with the surrounding forest, tells me that in those days he sometimes saw it all alive with ducks and other waterfowl, and that there were many eagles about it. He came here fishing, and used an old log canoe which he found on the shore. It was made of 2 white pine logs dug out and pinned together, and was cut off square at the ends. It was very clumsy, but lasted a great many years before it became waterlogged, and perhaps sank to the bottom. He did not know whose it was. It belonged to the pond. He used to make a cable for his anchor of strips of hickory bark tied together. An old man, a potter, who lived by the pond before the Revolution, told him once that there was an iron chest at the bottom, and that he had seen it. Sometimes it would come floating up to the shore, but when you went toward it, and would go back into deep water and disappear. I was pleased to hear of the old log canoe, which took the place of an Indian one of the same material but more graceful construction, which perchance had first been a tree on the bank, and then, as it were, fell into the water, to float there for a generation, the most proper vessel for the lake. I remember that when I first looked into these depths, there were many large trunks to be seen indistinctly lying on the bottom, which had either been blown or over formerly, or left on this ice at the last cutting, when wood was cheaper, but now they have mostly disappeared. When I first paddled a boat on Walden, it was completely surrounded by thick and lofty pine and oak woods, and in some of its coves, grapevines had run over the trees next to the water and formed bowers under which a boat could pass. The hills which form its shores are so steep, and the woods on them were then so high that as you looked down from the west end, it had the appearance of an amphitheater for some kind of sylvan spectacle. I have spent many an hour, when I was younger, floating over its surface, as the zephyr willed, having paddled my boat to the middle, and lying on my back across the seats, in a summer forenoon, dreaming awake until I was aroused by the boat touching the sand, and I arose to see what shore my fates had impelled me to. Days when idleness was the most attractive and productive industry. Many a forenoon have I stolen away, preferring to spend thus the most valued part of the day, for I was rich, if not in money, in sunny hours and summer days, and I spent them lavishly. Nor do I regret that I did not waste more of them in the workshop or the teacher's desk. But since I left those shores, the woodchoppers have still further laid them waste, and now, for many a year, there will be no more rambling through the aisles of the wood, with occasional vistas through which you can see the water. My muse may be excused if she is silent here henceforth. How can you expect the birds to sing when their groves are cut down? Now, the trunks of trees on the bottom, and the old log canoe, and the dark surrounding woods are gone, and the villagers who scarcely know where it lies, instead of going to the pond to bathe or drink, are thinking to bring its water, which should be as sacred as the Ganges at least, to the village in a pipe to wash their dishes with, to earn their Walden by the turning of a cock or a drawing of a plug. That devilish iron horse, whose ear-rending neigh is heard throughout the town, has muddied the boiling spring with its foot, and he it is that has browsed off all the woods on Walden shore, that Trojan horse with 1,000 men in its belly, introduced by mercenary Greeks. Where is the country's champion, the Moor of Moor Hill, to meet him at the deep cut and thrust an avenging lance between the ribs of the bloated pest? Nevertheless, of all the characters I have known, perhaps Walden wears best, and best preserves its purity. Many men have been likened to it, but few deserve that honor. Though the woodchoppers have laid bare first this shore and then that, and the Irish have built their sties by it, and the railroad is infringed on its border, and the icemen have skimmed it once, it is itself unchanged, the same water which my youthful eyes fell on, and all the changes in me. It has not acquired one permanent wrinkle after all its ripples. It is perennially young, and I may stand and see a swallow dip apparently to pick an insect from its surface as of yore. It struck me again tonight, as if I had not seen it almost daily for more than 20 years. Why, here is Walden, the same woodland lake that I discovered so many years ago. Where a forest was cut down last winter, another is springing up by its shore as lustily as ever. The same thought is welling up to its surface that was then. It is the same liquid joy and happiness to itself and its maker, aye, and it may be to me. It is the work of a brave man, surely, in whom there was no guile. He rounded this water with his hand, deepened and clarified it in his thought, and in his will bequeathed it to Concord. I see by its face that it is visited by the same reflection, and I can almost say, Walden, is it you? It is no dream of mine to ornament a line. I cannot come nearer to God and heaven than I live to Walden even. I am its stony shore, and the breeze that passes o'er. In the hollow of my hand are its water and its sand, and its deepest resort lies high in my thought. The cars never pause to look at it, yet I fancy that the engineers and firemen and brakemen and those passengers who have a season ticket and see it often are better men for the sight. The engineer does not forget at night, or his nature does not, that he has beheld this vision of serenity and purity once at least during the day. Though seen but once, it helps to wash out State Street and the engine soot. He proposes that it be called God's Drop. I have said that Walden has no visible inlet nor outlet, but it is on the one hand distantly and indirectly related to Flint's Pond, which is more elevated, by a chain of small ponds coming from that quarter, and on the other directly and manifestly to Concord River, which is lower, by a similar chain of ponds, through which in some other geological period it may have flowed, and by a little digging, which God forbid it can be made to flow thither again. If by living thus reserved and austere, like a hermit in the woods, so long it has acquired such wonderful purity, who would not regret that the comparatively impure waters of Flint's Pond should be mingled with, or itself should ever go to waste its sweetness in the ocean wave? Flint's, or Sandy Pond in Lincoln, our greatest lake and inland sea, lies about a mile east of Walden. It is much larger, being said to contain 197 acres. It is more fertile in fish, but it is comparatively shallow and not remarkably pure. A walk through the woods thither was often my recreation. It was worth the while, if only to feel the wind blow on your cheek freely and see the waves run. And remember the life of mariners. I went to chestnutting there in the fall, on windy days, when the nuts were dropping on into the water and were washed to my feet. And one day, as I crept along its sedgy shore, the fresh spray blowing in my face, I came upon the moldering wreck of a boat, the sides gone, and hardly more than the impression of its flat bottom left amid the rushes. Yet its model was sharply defined, as if it were a large decayed pad with its vanes. It was as impressive a wreck as one could imagine on the seashore, and had as good a moral. It is by this time mere vegetable mold, and undistinguishable upon shore, through which rushes and flags have pushed up. I used to admire the ripple marks on the sandy bottom at the north end of this pond, made firm and hard to the feet of the wader by the pressure of the water, and the rushes which grew in Indian file, in waving lines, corresponding to these marks, rank upon rank, as if the waves had planted them. There also I have found, in considerable quantities, curious balls, composed, apparently, of fine grass or roots, of pipework perhaps, from half an inch to 4 inches in diameter, and perfectly spherical. These wash back and forth in shallow water on a sandy bottom, and are sometimes cast on the shore. They are either solid grass or have little sand in the middle. At first you would say that they are formed by the action of the waves, like a pebble, yet the smallest are made of equally coarse materials, half an inch long, and they are produced only at one season of the year. Moreover, the waves, I suspect, do not so much construct as wear down the material, which has already acquired consistency. They preserve their form, when dry, for an indefinite period. Flint's Pond. Such is the poverty of our nomenclature. What right had the unclean and stupid farmer, whose farm abutted on this sky water, whose shores he has ruthlessly laid bare, to give his name to it? Some skinflint who loved better the reflecting surface of $1, or a bright cent in which he could see his own brazen face, who regarded even the wild ducks which settled in it as trespassers, his fingers grown into crooked and horny talons from the long habit of grasping harpy-like. So it is not named for me. I go not there to see him nor to hear of him, who never saw it, who never bathed in it, who never loved it, who never protected it, who never spoke a good word for it, nor thanked God that he had made it. Rather, let it be named from the fishes that swim in it, the wild fowl or quadrupeds which frequent it, the wild flowers which grow by its shores, or some wild man or child the thread of whose history is interwoven with its own. Not from him who could show no title to it but the deed which a like-minded neighbor or legislator gave him, who thought only of its money value, whose presence perchance cursed all the shore, who exhausted the land around it and would fain have exhausted the waters within it, who regretted only that it was not English hay or cranberry meadow. There was nothing to redeem it, forsooth, in his eyes, and would have drained and sold it for the mud at its bottom. It did not turn his mill, and it had no privilege to him to behold it. I respect not his labors, his farm where everything has its price. Who would carry the landscape? Who would carry his God to market if he could get anything for him? Who goes to market for his God, as it is, on whose farm nothing grows free? Whose fields bear no crops? Whose meadows no flowers? Whose trees no fruits but dollars? Who loves not the beauty of his fruits? Whose fruits are not ripe for him till they are turned to dollars? Give me the poverty that enjoys true wealth. Farmers are respectable and interesting to me in proportion as they are poor. Poor farmers, a model farm, where the house stands like a fungus in a muck heap, chambers for men, horses, oxen, and swine, cleansed and uncleansed, all contiguous to one another, stocked with men, a great grease-spout redolent of manures and buttermilk, under a high state of cultivation, being manured with the hearts and brains of men, as if you were to raise your potatoes in the churchyard. Such is a model farm. No, it is the fairest features of the landscape are to be named after men. Let them be the noblest and worthiest men alone. Let our lakes receive as true names as, at least, as the Icarian Sea, where still the shore a brave attempt resounds. Goose Pond, of small extent, is on my way to Flint's. Fairhaven, an expansion of Concord River, said to contain some 70 acres, is a mile southwest, and White Pond, of about 40 acres, is a mile and a half beyond Fairhaven. This is my lake country. These, with Concord River, are my water privileges, and night and day, year in, year out, they grind such grist as I carry to them. Since the woodcutters and the railroad, I myself have profaned Walden, perhaps the most attractive, if not the most beautiful of all our lakes. The gem of the woods is White Pond. A poor name from its commonness, whether derived from the remarkable purity of its waters or the color of its sands. In these, as in other respects, however, it is a lesser twin of Walden. They are so much alike that you would say they must be connected underground. It has the same stony shore, and its waters are of the same hue, as at Walden, in sultry dog-day weather, looking down through the woods on some of its bays which are not so deep, but that the reflection from the bottom tinges them. Its waters are of a misty bluish green or glaucous color. Many years since, I used to go there to collect the sand by cartloads to make sandpaper with, and I have continued to visit it ever since. One who frequents it proposes to call it Virid Lake. Perhaps it might be called Yellow Pine Lake, from the following circumstance. About 50 years ago, you could see the top of a pitch pine, of the kind called yellow pine hereabouts, and though it is not a distinct species, projecting above the surface in deep water, many rods from the shore, it was even supposed by some that the pond had sunk, and this was one of the primitive forests that formerly stood there. I found that even so long ago as 1792, in a topographical description of the town of Concord, by one of its citizens in the collections of the Massachusetts Historical Society, the author, after speaking of Walden and White Ponds, adds, in the middle of the latter may be seen, when the water is very low, a tree which appears as if it grew in the place where it now stands. Although the roots are 50 feet below the surface of the water, the top of this tree is broken off, and at that place measures 14 inches in diameter. In the spring of '49, I talked with the man who lives nearest the pond in Sudbury, who told me that it was he who got out of his tree 10 or 15 years before. As near as he could remember, it stood 12 or 15 rods from the shore, when the water was 30 or 40 feet deep. It was in the winter, and he had been getting out ice in the forenoon, and he had resolved that in the afternoon, with the aid of his neighbors, he would take out the old yellow pine. He sawed a channel in the ice toward the shore, and hauled it over and along and out onto the ice with oxen. But before he had gone far in his work, he was surprised to find that it was wrong end upward, and the stumps of the branches pointed down, and the small end firmly fastened in the sandy bottom. It was about a foot in diameter at the big end, and he had expected to get a good sawlog, but it was so rotten as to be fit only for fuel, if for that. He had some of it in his shed then. There were marks of an axe and of woodpeckers on the butt. He thought that it might have been a dead tree on the shore, but was finally blown over into the pond, and after the top had become waterlogged, while the butt end was still dry and light, had drifted out and sunk wrong end up. His father, 80 years old, could not remember when it was not there. Several pretty large logs may still be seen lying on the bottom, where, owing to the undulation of the surface, they look like huge water snakes in motion. This pond has rarely been profaned by a boat, for there is little in it to tempt a fisherman. Instead of the white lily, which requires mud, or the common sweet flag, the blue flag, Iris versicolor, grows thinly in the pure water, rising from the stony bottom all around the shore, where it is visited by hummingbirds in June. And the color both of its bluish blades and its flowers, especially their reflections, are in singular harmony with the glaucous water. White Pond and Walden are great crystals on the surface of the earth, lakes of light if they were permanently congealed and small enough to be clutched. They would, perchance, be carried off by slaves, like precious stones to adorn the heads of emperors. But being liquid and ample and secured to us and our successors forever, we disregard them and run after the diamond of Koh-i-Noor. They are too pure to have a market value. They contain no muck. How much more beautiful than our lives, how much more transparent than our characters are they. We never learned the meanness of them. How much fairer than the pool before the farmer's door, in which his ducks swim. Hither the clean, wild ducks come. Nature has no human inhabitant who appreciates her. The birds with their plumage and their notes are in harmony with the flowers. But what youth or maiden conspires with the wild, luxuriant beauty of nature? She flourishes most alone, far from the towns where they reside. Talk of heaven, ye disgrace earth. And that brings us to the end of the pond. Ponds. Yeah, ponds, plural, obviously. So that was actually a nicer chapter. It was long, but it was refreshing. He was really just describing in and around the ponds that surrounded where he lived, and the different time periods and the different seasons and their colors and their degradations or improvements over the years. So not so much preachy this time around as just observing and respecting the nature around him. I'll always have a soft spot for any sort of park that has a pond in it. So I understand the reverence that you can have for seeing a nice body of water that is not really spoiled too much. Just it exists, is allowed to exist without being troubled. So that's definitely one of those things that you just kind of can sit back and enjoy. The different seasons and the different characters that you can see each pond in. And over the years they change, whether there be fish inside or reeds along the shoreline. There's definitely a lot of time that can be spent just sitting by the pond, listening to the water lap at the shore. Alright guys, it is a little past 9 and we've got another couple chapters that we can get through the night, but let's take a quick break. I will stand up, refill my glass of wine, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Alright, thanks guys! Alright, we are back. Gave the kitty some attention and topped up my glass of wine, so we should be ready to get back to it. Let's test something. I have not been hearing my page turn go through. There it is, okay. Just needed to tweak the output device on my OBS monitor. Alright, so let's see what we've got left tonight. The next one's not terribly long. We are a little bit more than halfway through this book. And actually there's some following, this is a kind of a 2-in-1 ebook with the On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, is a short story or essay that he wrote after writing Walden, that I think is not really part of this, but we may or may not include. So we're probably a little bit more than halfway overall. There's about 9 chapters left. The pace we're going is pretty solid. So, alright, let's just get back into it and we will see how far we get tonight. And so our next chapter is Baker Farm. Sometimes I rambled to pine groves, standing like temples or like fleets at sea, full-rigged with wavy boughs and rippling with light, so soft and green and shady that the druids would have forsaken their oaks to worship in them, or to the cedarwood beyond Flint's Pond, where the trees, covered with hoary blueberries, aspiring higher and higher, are fit to stand before Valhalla, and the creeping juniper covers the ground with wreaths full of fruit, or to swamps, where the usnea lichen hangs in festoons from the white spruce trees, and toadstools, round tables of the swamp gods, cover the ground, and more beautiful fungi adorn the stumps, like butterflies or shells, vegetable winkles, where the swamp pink and dogwood grow, and the red alderberry glows like eyes of imps, the waxwork grooves and crushes the hardest woods in its fold, and the wild hollyberries make the beholder forget his home with their beauty, and he is dazzled and tempted by by nameless other wild forbidden fruits, too fair for mortal taste. Instead of calling on some scholar, I paid many a visit to particular trees, of kinds which are rare in this neighborhood, standing far away in the middle of some pasture, or in the depths of a wood or swamp, or on a hilltop, such as the black birch, of which we have some handsome specimens, 2 feet in diameter. Its cousin, the yellow birch, with its loose golden vest, perfumed like the first, the beech, which has so neat a bole and beautifully lichen painted, perfect in all its details, of which, excepting scattered specimens, I know but one small grove of sizable trees left in the township, supposed by some to have been planted by the pigeons that were once baited with beech nuts nearby. It is worth the while to see the silver grains sparkle when you split this wood. The bass, the hornbeam, the Celtis occidentalis, of false elm, or of which we have but one well-grown, some taller mast of a pine, a shingle tree, or a more perfect hemlock than usual, standing like a pagoda in the midst of the woods, and many others I could mention. These were the shrines I visited both summer and winter. Once it chanced that I stood in the very abutment of a rainbow's arch, which filled the lower stratum of the atmosphere, tinging the grass and leaves around, and dazzling me as if I looked through colored crystal. It was a lake of rainbow light, in which for a short while I lived like a dolphin. If it had lasted longer, it might have tinged my employments in life. As I walked on the railroad causeway, I used to wonder at the halo of light around the shadow, and would fain fancy myself one of the elect. One who had visited me declared that the shadows of some Irishmen before him had no halo about them, and that it was only natives who were so distinguished. Benvenuto Cellini tells us in his memoirs that after a certain terrible dream or vision which he had during his confinement in the castle of St. Angelo, a resplendent light appeared over the shadow of his head at morning and even, whether he was in Italy or France, and it was particularly conspicuous when the grass was moist with dew. This was probably the same phenomenon to which I have referred, which is especially observed in the morning, but also at other times, and even by moonlight. Though a constant one, it is not commonly noticed, and in the case of an excitable imagination like Cellini's, it would be basis enough for superstition. Besides, he tells us that he showed it to very few, but are they not indeed distinguished, who are conscious that they are regarded at all? I set out one afternoon to go a-fishing to Fairhaven, through the woods, to eke out my scanty fare of vegetables. My way led through Pleasant Meadow, an adjunct of the Baker farm, that retreat of which a poet has since sung, beginning, "Thy entry is a pleasant field, which some mossy fruit trees yield, partly to a ruddy brook by gliding musquash undertook, and mercurial trout darting about." Okay, Thoreau's poems, kinda simple. Two lines, they rhyme. The next 2 lines, they rhyme. The next 2 lines, they also rhyme. Stick to prose. You're not that much of a poet. Let's be real here. I thought of living there before I went to Walden. I hooked the apples, leaped the brook, and scared the musquash and the trout. It was one of those afternoons which seem indefinitely long before one in which many events may happen. A large portion of our natural life, though it was already left half spent when I started. By the way, there came up a shower, which compelled me to stand half an hour under a pine, piling boughs over my head, and wearing my handkerchief for a shed, when at length I had made one cast over the pickerel weed, standing up to my middle in water, and found myself suddenly in the shadow of a cloud, and the thunder began to rumble with such emphasis that I could do no more than listen to it. The gods must be proud, thought I, with such forked flashes, to rout a poor unarmed fisherman. So I made haste for shelter to the nearest hut, which stood half a mile from any road, but so much the nearer to the pond, and had long been uninhabited. And here a poet builded, in the completed years, for behold the trivial cabin that to destruction steers. Yeah, you're right. Poetry is deceptively simple. And it depends, for simple poetry, just to get your own thoughts down on paper, it is simple. For your own consumption. But if you're trying to make something to move the hearts and minds of readers and listeners, it takes a little bit more than rhyming couplets. Sorry. So the muse fables. But therein, as I found, dwelt now John Field, an Irishman, and his wife, and several children, from the broad-faced boy who assisted his father at his work, and now came running by his side from the bog to escape the rain, to the wrinkled, sibyl-like, cone-headed infant that sat upon its father's knee as in the palaces of nobles, and looked out from its home in the midst of wet and hunger inquisitively upon the stranger, with the privilege of infancy, not knowing but it was just the last of a noble line, and the hope and cynosure of the world, instead of John Field's poor starveling brat. There we sat together under the part of the roof which leaked the least, while it showered and thundered about. I had sat there many times of old before the ship was built that floated his family to America. An honest, hard-working but shiftless man, plainly, was John Field. And his wife, she too, was brave to cook so many successive dinners in the recesses of that lofty stove, with round, greasy face and bare breast, still thinking to improve her condition one day, with the never-absent mop in one hand, and yet no effects of it visible anywhere. The chickens, which had also taken shelter here from the rain, stalked about the room like members of the family, too humanized, methought, to roast well. They stood and looked in my eye or pecked at my shoe insignificantly. Meanwhile, my host told me his story, how hard he worked bogging for a neighboring farmer, turning up a meadow with a spade or bog hoe at the rate of $10 an acre, and the use of the land with manure for 1 year. And his little broad-faced son worked cheerfully at his father's side the while, not knowing how poor a bargain the latter had made. I tried to help him with my experience, telling him that he was one of my nearest neighbors, and that I, too, who came a-fishing here, and looked like a loafer, was getting my living like himself, and that I lived in a tight, light, and clean house, which hardly cost more than the annual rent of such a ruin as it commonly amounts to, and how, if he chose, he might in a month or two build himself a palace of his own, that I did not use tea, nor coffee, nor butter, nor milk, nor fresh meat, and so did not have to work to get them. Again, as I did not work hard, I did not have to eat hard, and it cost me but a trifle for my food. But as he began with tea and coffee and butter and milk and beef, he had to work hard to pay for them. And when he had worked hard, he had to eat hard again to repair the waste of his system. And so it was as broad as it was long. Indeed, it was broader than it was long, for he was discontented and wasted his life into the bargain. And yet he had rated it as a gain in coming to America, that here you could get tea and coffee and meat every day. But the only true America is that country which you are at liberty to pursue such a mode of life as may enable you to do without these, and where the state does not endeavor to compel you to sustain the slavery and war and other superfluous expenses which directly or indirectly result from the use of such things. For I purposely talked to him as if he were a philosopher, or desired to be one. I should be glad if all the meadows on the earth were left in a wild state, if that were the consequence of men's beginning to redeem themselves. A man will not need to study history to find out what is best for his own culture. But alas, the culture of an Irishman is an enterprise to be undertaken with a sort of moral bog-hoe. I told him that as he worked so hard at bogging, he required thick boots and stout clothing, which yet were soon soiled and worn out. But I wore light shoes and thin clothing, which cost not half so much, though he might think that I was dressed like a gentleman, which, however, was not the case. And in an hour or two, without labor, but as a recreation, I could, if I wished, catch as many fish as I should want for 2 days, or earn enough money to support me a week. And if he and his family would live simply, they might all go a huckleberrying in the summer for their amusement. John heaved a sigh at this, and his wife stared with arms akimbo, and both appeared to be wondering if they had capital enough to begin such a course with, or arithmetic enough to carry it through. It was sailing by dead reckoning to them, and they saw not clearly how to make their port so. Therefore, I suppose, they still take life bravely, after their fashion, face to face, giving it tooth and nail, not having skill to split its massive columns with any fine entering wedge, and rout it in detail, thinking to deal with it roughly, as one should handle a thistle. But they fight at an overwhelming disadvantage, living, John Field, alas, without arithmetic, and failing so. Alright, so this is another of those holier-than-thou chapters where he's preaching at both the reader and the poor targets of his writing. Do you ever fish? I asked. Oh yes, I catch a mess now and then when I am lying by. Good perch I catch. What's your bait? I catch shiners with fishworms, and bait the perch with them. You'd better go now, John, said his wife, with glistening and hopeful face, but John demurred. The shower was now over, and rainbow above the eastern woods promised a fair evening. So I took my departure. When I got without, I asked for a drink, hoping to get a sight of the well bottom to complete my survey of the premises. But there, alas, are shallows and quicksands, and rope broken withal, and bucket irrecoverable. Meanwhile, the right culinary vessel was selected. Water was seemingly distilled, and after consultation and a long delay, passed out to the thirsty one. Not yet suffered to cool, not yet to settle. Such gruel sustains life here, I thought. So, shutting my eyes and excluding the motes by a skillfully directed undercurrent, I drank to genuine hospitality, the heartiest draught I could. I am not squeamish in such cases when manners are concerned. As I was leaving the Irishman's roof after the rain, bending my steps again to the pond, my haste to catch pickerel, wading in retired meadows, in sloughs and bog holes, in forlorn and savage places, appeared, for an instant, trivial to me, who had been sent to school and college. But as I ran down the hill toward the reddening west, and the rainbow over my shoulder, and some faint tinkling sounds borne to my ear through the cleansed air from I know not what quarter, my good genius seemed to say, "Go fish, and hunt far and wide day by day, farther and wider, and rest thee by many brooks and hearthsides, without misgiving. Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. Rise free from care before the dawn, and seek adventures. Let the noon find thee by other lakes, and the night overtake thee everywhere at home." There are no larger fields than these, no worthier games than may here be played. Grow wild, according to thy nature, like these sedges and brakes, which will never become English hay. Let the thunder rumble. What if it threaten ruin to farmers' crops? That is not its errand to thee. Take shelter under the cloud, while they flee to carts and sheds. Let not to get a living be thy trade, but thy sport. Enjoy the land, but own it not. The want of enterprise and faith, men are where they are, buying and selling and spending their lives like serfs. Oh, Baker Farm, landscape, where the richest element is a little sunshine innocent. No one runs to revel on thy rail-fenced lea. Debate with no man hast thou, with questions art never perplexed. As tame as the first sight is now, in thy plain russet gabardine dressed. Come, ye who love, and ye who hate, children of the holy dove, and Guy Fawkes of the state, and hang conspiracies from the tough rafters of the trees. Men come tamely home at night, only from the next field or street, where their household echoes haunt, and their life pines because it breathes its own breath over again. Their shadows, morning and evening, reach farther than their daily steps. We should come home from far, from adventures and perils and discoveries every day, with new experiences and character. Before I had reached the pond, some fresh impulse had brought out John Field, with altered mind, letting go bogging ere this sunset. But he, poor man, disturbed only a couple of fins, while I was catching a fair string, and he said it was his luck. But when we changed seats in the boat, luck changed seats too. Poor John Field! I trust he does not read this, unless he will improve by it. Thinking to live by some derivative old country mode in this primitive new country, to catch perch with shiners. It is good bait sometimes, I allow, with his horizon all his own. Yet he a poor man, born to be poor, with his inherited Irish poverty or poor life, his Adam's grandmother and boggy ways, not to rise in this world, nor he nor his posterity, till their wading, webbed, bog-trotting feet get Talaria to their heels. Alright. Calm down, Henry. That's a little on the nose. Like, come on, bud. We expect that sort of talk from Lovecraft, not from Thoreau. So that was the end of that chapter, by the way. The Baker Farm. So, yeah, we thought he was getting better, and now he's talking down about the Irish immigrant through the whole chapter. How the infant is haughty but doesn't know that he's just a poor kid. How the wife is not really doing any work around the house that is appreciable. How the chickens have the run of the house, and how the farmer will always be poor because he's too stupid to not be poor. Like, come on, Thoreau. We didn't need to have 4 pages of that muck. There are so many great bits from Archer that I can't even narrow it down. But, you know what? I believe it. I should really rewatch Archer. It's such a good show. Alright, our next chapter tonight is Higher Laws. This is about a 6-pager, so this will probably about take us to the end of tonight. As I came home through the woods with my string of fish, trailing my pole, it being now quite dark, I caught a glimpse of a woodchuck stealing across my path, and felt a strange thrill of savage delight, and was strongly tempted to seize and devour him raw. Not that I was hungry then, except for that wildness which he represented. Once or twice, however, while I lived at the pond, I found myself ranging the woods, like a half-starved hound, with a strange abandonment, seeking some kind of venison which I might devour. No morsel could have been too savage for me. The wildest scenes had become unaccountably familiar. I found in myself, and still find, an instinct toward a higher or as it is named, spiritual life, as do most men, and another toward a primitive, rank, and savage one, and I reverence them both. I love the wild not less than the good. The wildness and adventure that are in fishing still recommend it to me. I like sometimes to take rank hold on life and spend my day more as the animals do. Perhaps I have owed to this employment and to hunting, when quite young, my closest acquaintance with nature. They early introduced to us to and detain us in scenery, with which otherwise at that age we should have little acquaintance. Fishermen, hunters, woodchoppers, and others, spending their lives in the fields and woods in a peculiar sense a part of nature themselves, are often in a more favorable mood for observing her, in the intervals of their pursuits, than philosophers or poets even, who approach her with expectation. She is not afraid to exhibit herself to them. The traveler on the prairie is naturally a hunter, on the headwaters of the Missouri and Columbia a trapper, and on the falls of St. Mary a fisherman. He who is only a traveler learns things at second hand and by the halves, and is poor authority. We are most interested when science reports what those men already know practically or instinctively, for that alone is a true humanity, or account of human experience. They mistake who assert that the Yankee has few amusements, because he has not so many public holidays, and men and boys do not play so many games as they do in England. For here the most primitive but solitary amusements of hunting, fishing, and the like have not yet given place to the former. Almost every New England boy among my contemporaries shouldered a fowling piece between the ages of 10 and 14, and his hunting and fishing grounds were not limited like the preserves of an English nobleman, but were more boundless even than those of a savage. No wonder, then, that he did not oftener stay to play on the common. But already a change is taking place, owing not to an increased humanity, but to an increased scarcity of game. For perhaps the hunter is the greatest friend of the animals ever hunted, not excepting the Humane Society. Moreover, when at the pond, I wished sometimes to add fish to my fare for variety. I have actually fished from the same kind of necessity that the first fishers did. Whatever humanity I might conjure up against it was all fictitious, and concerned my philosophy more than my feelings. I speak of fishing only now, for I have long felt differently about fowling, and sold my gun before I went into the woods. Not that I am less humane than others, but I did not perceive that my feelings were much affected. I did not pity the fishes nor the worms. This was habit. As for fowling, during the last years that I carried a gun, my excuse was that I was studying ornithology, and sought only new or rare birds. But I confess that I am now inclined to think there is a finer way of studying ornithology than this. It requires so much closer attention to the habitats of the birds, that, if for that reason only, I have been willing to omit the gun, yet notwithstanding the objection on the score of humanity, I am compelled to doubt if equally valuable sports are ever substituted for these, and when some of my friends have asked me anxiously about their boys, whether they should let them hunt, I have answered yes, remembering that it was one of the best parts of my education. Make them hunters, though sportsmen only at first, if possible, mighty hunters at last, so that they shall not find game large enough for them in this or any vegetable wilderness. Hunters, as well as fishers of men. Thus far I am of the opinion of Chaucer's nun, who gave not of the text a pulled hen, that saith that hunters ben not holy men. Well, we could read Chaucer sometime. Maybe. There is a period in the history of the individual, as of the race, when the hunters are the best men. As the Algonquins called them, we cannot but pity the boy who has never fired a gun. He is no more humane, while his education has been sadly neglected. This was my answer with respect to those youths who were bent on this pursuit, trusting that they would soon outgrow it. No humane being, past the thought stage of boyhood, will wantonly murder any creature which holds its life by the same tenure that he does. The hare, in its extremity, cries like a child. I warn you, mothers, that my sympathies do not always make the usual philanthropic distinctions. Such is oftenest the young man's introduction to the forest, and the most original part of himself. He goes thither at first as a hunter and fisher, until at last, if he has the seeds of a better life in him, he distinguishes his proper objects, as a poet or naturalist it may be, and leaves the gun and fish pole behind. The mass of men are still and always young in this respect. In some countries, a hunting parson is no uncommon sight. Such a one might make a good shepherd's dog, but is far from being the good shepherd. I have been surprised to consider that the only obvious employment, except wood chopping, ice cutting, or the like business, which ever, to my knowledge, detained at Walden Pond for a whole half day any of my fellow citizens, whether fathers or children of the town, with just one exception, was fishing. Commonly, they did not think that they were lucky or well paid for their time, unless they got a long string of fish, though they had the opportunity of seeing the pond all the while. They might go there 1,000 times before the sediment of fishing would sink to the bottom and leave their purpose pure. But no doubt, such a clarifying process would be going on all the while. The governor and his council faintly remember the pond, for they went to fishing there when they were boys, but now they are too old and dignified to go a-fishing. And so they know it no more forever. Yet even they expect to go to heaven at last. If the legislator regards it, it is chiefly to regulate the number of hooks to be used there, but they know nothing about the hook of hooks with which to angle for the pond itself, impaling the legislature for a bait. Thus, even in civilized communities, the embryo man passes through the hunter stage of development. I have found repeatedly of late years that I cannot fish without falling a little in self-respect. I have tried it again and again. I have skill at it, and, like many of my fellows, I have a certain instinct for it, which revives from time to time. But always, when I have done, I feel that it would have been better if I had not fished. I think that I do not mistake. It is a faint intimation. Yet so are the first streaks of morning. There is unquestionably this instinct in me, which belongs to the lower orders of creation. Yet, with every year I am less a fisherman. Though without more humanity, or even wisdom, at present I am no fisherman at all. But I see that if I were to live in a wilderness, I should again be tempted to become a fisher and hunter in earnest. Beside, there is something essentially unclean about this diet on all flesh, and I began to see where housework commences, and whence the endeavor, which costs so much, to wear a tidy and respectable appearance each day to keep the house sweet and free from all ill odors and sights. Having been my own butcher and scullion and cook, as well as the gentleman for whom the dishes were served up, I can speak from an unusual and complete experience. The practical objection to animal food in my case was its uncleanness, and besides, when I had caught and cleaned and cooked and eaten my fish, they seemed not to have fed me essentially. It was insignificant and unnecessary, and cost more than it came to. A little bread or a few potatoes would have done as well, and with less trouble and filth. Like many of my contemporaries, I had rarely for many years used animal food or tea or coffee, etc. Not so much because of any ill effects, which I had traced to them, as because they were not agreeable to my imagination. The repugnance to animal food is not the effect of experience, but is an instinct. It appeared more beautiful to live low and fare hard in many respects, and though I never did so, I went far enough to please my imagination. I believe that every man who has ever been earnest to preserve his higher or poetic faculties in the best condition has been particularly inclined to abstain from animal food, and from much food of any kind. It is a significant fact, stated by entomologists. I find it in Kirby and Spence that some insects, in their perfect state, though furnished with organs of feeding, make no use of them, and they lay it down as a general rule that almost all insects in this state eat much less than in that of larvae. The voracious caterpillar when transformed into a butterfly, and the gluttonous maggot when become a fly, content themselves with a drop or two of honey, or some other sweet liquid. The abdomen under the wings of the butterfly still represents the larva. This is the tidbit which tempts this insectivorous fate. The gross feeder is a man in the larva state, and there are whole nations in that condition, nations without fancy or imagination, whose vast abdomens betray them. It is hard to provide and cook so simple and clean diet as will not offend the imagination, but this, I think, is to be fed when we feed the body. They should both sit down at the same table, yet perhaps this may be done. The fruits eaten temperately need not make us ashamed of our appetites, nor interrupt the worthiest pursuits, but put an extra condiment into your dish, and it will poison you. It is not worth the while to live by rich cookery. Most men would feel shame if caught preparing their own hands precisely such a dinner, whether of animal or vegetable food, as it is every day prepared for them by others. Yet still this is otherwise. We are not civilized. And if gentlemen and ladies are not true men and women, this certainly suggests what change is to be made. It may be vain to ask why the imagination will not be reconciled to flesh and fat. I am satisfied that it is not. Is it not a reproach that man is a carnivorous animal? True, he can and does live in a great measure by preying on other animals, but this is a miserable way, as anyone who will go to snaring rabbits or slaughtering lambs may learn, and he will be regarded as a benefactor of his race, who shall teach man to confine himself to a more innocent and wholesome diet. Whatever my own practice may be, I have no doubt that it is a part of the destiny of the human race, in its gradual improvement, to leave off eating animals, as surely as the savage tribes have left off eating each other when they came in contact with the more civilized. If one listens to the faintest but constant suggestions of his genius, which are certainly true, he sees not to what extremes or even insanity it may lead him, and yet that way, as he grows more resolute and faithful, his road lies. The faintest assured objection which one healthy man feels will at length prevail over the arguments and customs of mankind. No man ever followed his genius till it misled him, though the result were bodily weakness. Yet perhaps no one can say that the consequences were to be regretted, for these were a life in conformity to higher principles. If the day and the night are such that you greet them with joy, and life amidst a fragrance like flowers and sweet-scented herbs is more elastic, more starry, more immortal, that is your success. All nature is your congratulation, and you have cause momentarily to bless yourself. The greatest pains and values are farthest from being appreciated. We easily come to doubt if they exist. We soon forget them. They are the highest reality. Perhaps the facts most astounding and most real are never communicated by man to man. The true harvest of my daily life is somewhat as intangible and indescribable as the tints of morning or evening. It is a little stardust caught, a segment of the rainbow which I have clutched. Yet for my part, I was never unusually squeamish. I could sometimes eat a fried rat with good relish, if it were necessary. I am glad to have drunk water so long, for the same reason that I prefer the natural sky to an opium-eater's heaven. I would fain keep sober always, and there are infinite degrees of drunkenness. I believe that water is the only drink for a wise man. Wine is not so noble a liquor. Hey, Thoreau, you shut your mouth. And think of dashing the hopes of a morning with a cup of warm coffee, or of an evening with a dish of tea. All right, now you're just, this is getting personal now. Come on. Ah, how low I fall when I am tempted by them. Even music may be intoxicating. Such apparently slight causes destroyed Greece and Rome, and will destroy England and America. Of all ebriosity, who does not prefer to be intoxicated by the air he breathes? I have found it to be the most serious objection to coarse labors long continued, that they compelled me to eat and drink coarsely also. But to tell the truth, I find myself at present somewhat less particular in these respects. I carry less religion to the table, ask no blessing, not because I'm wiser than I was, but I am obliged to confess because, however much it is to be regretted, with years I have grown more coarse and indifferent. Perhaps these questions are entertained only in youth, as most believe of poetry. My practice is nowhere. My opinion is here. Nevertheless, I am far from regarding myself as one of those privileged ones to whom the Ved refers when it says that he who has true faith in the omnipresent Supreme Being may eat all that exists. That is not bound to inquire what is his food, or who prepares it, or even in their case it is to be observed, as a Hindu commentator has remarked, that the Vedant limits this privilege to the time of distress. Who has not sometimes derived an inexpressible satisfaction from his food, in which appetite had no share? I have been thrilled to think that I owed a mental perception to the commonly gross sense of taste, that I have been inspired through the palate, that some berries which I had eaten on a hillside had fed my genius, the soul not being mistress of herself, says Tseng Tzu. One looks, and one does not see. One listens, and one does not hear. One eats, and one does not know the savor of food. He who distinguishes the true savor of his food can never be a glutton. He who does not cannot be otherwise. A Puritan may go to his brown bread crust with as gross an appetite as ever an alderman to his turtle. Not that food which entereth into the mouth defileth a man, but the appetite with which it is eaten. It is neither the quality nor the quantity, but the devotion to sensual savors. When that which is eaten is not a viand to sustain our animal or inspire our spiritual life, but food for the worms that possess us. If the hunter has a taste for mud turtles, muskrats, and other such savage tidbits, the fine lady indulges a taste for jelly made of a calf's foot, or for sardines from over the sea, and they are even. He goes to the mill pond, she to her preserve pot. The wonder is how you and I can live this slimy, beastly life, eating and drinking. Our whole life is startlingly moral. There is never an instant's truce between virtue and vice. Goodness is the only investment that never fails. In the music of the harp, which trembles round the world, it is the insisting on this which thrills us. The harp is the traveling patterer for the universe's insurance company, recommending its laws, and our little goodness is all the assessment that we pay. Though the youth at last grows indifferent, the laws of the universe are not indifferent, but are forever on the side of the most sensitive. Listen to every zephyr for some reproof, for it is surely there, and he is unfortunate who does not hear it. We cannot touch a string or move a stop, but the charming moral transfixes us. Many an irksome noise go a long way off, is heard as music, a proud, sweet satire on the meanness of our lives. We are conscious of an animal in us, which awakens in proportion as our higher nature slumbers. It is reptile and sensual, and perhaps cannot be wholly expelled, like the worms which even in life and health occupy our bodies. Possibly we may withdraw from it, but never change its nature. I fear that it may enjoy a certain health of its own, that we may be well, yet not pure. The other day I picked up the lower jaw of a hog, with white and sound teeth and husks, which suggested that there was an animal health and vigor distinct from the spiritual. This creature succeeded by other means than temperance and purity. That in which men differ from brute beasts, says Mencius, is a thing very inconsiderable. The common herd lose it very soon. Superior men preserve it carefully. Who knows what sort of life would result if we had attained to purity? If I knew so wise a man as could teach me purity, I would go to seek him forthwith. A command over our passions, and over the external senses of the body, and good acts are declared by the Ved to be indispensable in the mind's approximation to God. Yet the spirit can, for the time, pervade and control every member and function of the body, and transmute what in form is the grossest sensuality into purity and devotion, the generative energy which, when we are loose, dissipates and makes us unclean, when we are content, invigorates and inspires us. Chastity is the flowering of man, and what are called genius, heroism, holiness, and the like are but various fruits which succeed it. Man flows at once to God when the channel of purity is open, but turns our purity, inspires, and our impurity casts us down. He is blessed who is assured that the animal is dying out in him day by day, and the divine being established. Perhaps there is none but has cause for shame on account of the inferior and brutish nature to which he is allied. I fear that we are such gods or demigods only as fawns and satyrs, the divine allied to beasts, the creatures of appetite, and that, to some extent, our very life is our disgrace. How happy is he who hath due place assigned to his beasts and disafforested his mind, can use his horse, goat, wolf, and every beast, and is not asked himself to all the rest. Else man not only is the herd of swine, but he's those devils too which did incline them to a headlong rage and made them worse. All sensuality is one, though it takes many forms. All purity is one. It is the same whether a man eat, or drink, or cohabit, or sleep sensually. They are but one appetite, and we only need to see a person do any one of these things to know how great a sensualist he is. The impure can neither stand nor sit with purity. When the reptile is attacked at one mouth of his burrow, he shows himself at another. If you would be chaste, you must be temperate. What is chastity? How shall a man know if he is chaste? He shall not know it. We have heard of this virtue, but we know not what it is. We speak conformably to the rumor which we have heard. From exertion come wisdom and purity, from sloth, ignorance, and sensuality. In the student, sensuality is a sluggish habit of mind. An unclean person is universally a slothful one who sits by a stove, whom the sun shines on prostrate, who reposes without being fatigued. If you would avoid uncleanness and all the sins, work earnestly. Though it be at cleaning a stable, nature is hard to be overcome, but she must be overcome. What avails it that you are Christian, if you are not purer than the heathen, if you deny yourself no more, if you are not more religious? I know of many types of systems of religion, esteemed heathenish, whose precepts fill the reader with shame and provoke him to new endeavors, though it be to the performance of rites merely. I hesitate to say these things. Okay, Henry, you don't hesitate to say anything, I swear. But it is not because of the subject. I care not how obscene my words are, but because I cannot speak of them without betraying my impurity. We discourse freely without shame of one form of sensuality, and are silent about another. We are so degraded that we cannot speak simply of the necessary functions of human nature. In earlier ages, in some countries, every function was reverently spoken of and regulated by law. Nothing was too trivial for the Hindu lawgiver. However offensive it may be to modern taste, he teaches how to eat, drink, cohabit, void excrement and urine, and the like, elevating what is mean, and does not falsely excuse himself by calling these things trifles. Every man is the builder of a temple, called his body to the god he worships, after a style purely his own, nor can he get off by hammering marble instead. We are all sculptors and painters, and our material is our own flesh and blood and bones. Any nobleness begins at once to refine a man's features, any meanness or sensuality to imbrute them. John Farmer sat at his door one September evening after a hard day's work, his mind still running on his labor more or less. Having bathed, he sat down to recreate his intellectual man. It was a rather cool evening, and some of his neighbors were apprehending a frost. He had not attended to the train of his thoughts long when he heard someone playing on a flute, and that sound harmonized with his mood. Still he thought of his work, but the burden of his thought was that though this kept running in his head, and he found himself planning and contriving it against his will, yet it concerned him very little. It was no more than the scurf of his skin, which was constantly shuffled off, but the notes of the flute came home to his ears out of a different sphere than that he worked in, and suggested work for certain faculties which slumbered in him. They gently did away with the street, and the village, and the state in which he lived. A voice said to him, "Why do you stay here and live this mean, moiling life, when a glorious existence is possible for you? Those same stars twinkle over the fields than these." But how to come out of this condition, and actually migrate thither? All that he could think of was to practice some new austerity, to let his mind descend into his body and redeem it, and treat himself with ever increasing respect. And that is the end of the Higher Laws chapter. So we don't have time in this for another one. The next one is just about as long. So let's take a few minutes to just kind of decompress. As you said, this last chapter was assuredly a reminder that hipsters have been around forever. Whether they be, well, if anything, he's picking it up. He's been vegetarian before it was cool. Before cool was cool. Bringing up the various references to scriptures and thoughts. He's brought up legalism with Mencius. He's brought up the Vedas for Hinduism, and like this, just finding justification all over. Indeed. Indeed, indeed. Henry hates boners and fun. Well put. But yeah, it's when he started ragging on the wine and the coffee and the tea. About had enough of that. Like, oh, do we got to keep reading this, guys? There was some good in that, where like the act of enjoying and really the sensuous nature of taking full awareness of your actions and what you partake of are a virtue in and of themselves. That is something that is worth thinking on. To just absent-mindedly partake of your food or your vices of choice or anything, to not really take enjoyment and appreciation of it is a shame, really, because we might as well find all the joy that life has to give us. So if you're in flying in the face of his advice or admonitions here, if you partake of your wine, enjoy it. Find the flavors, find the head, feel the astringency on your tongue, and really just live through each sense, each moment. Living in the moment, indeed. So, like, there's no harm in enjoying life. If you prefer to sit and play video games, enjoy the games, immerse yourself. If you want to listen to music, close your eyes, feel the melody, the harmonies, the counter rhythms. Just enjoy life as it comes to you. I think he put it poorly as he went through that, but that is a good lesson to come out of it. That for if you just mindlessly consume, whether it be media, food, drink, or otherwise, without stopping to enjoy it, what's the point? What's the point? But if you stop and take your time, enjoy it, find the foods that you like and find out why you like them, how you like them, or just sit and savor the taste. Savor the drink. Savor the buzz that a good coffee will give you. It's all worth it. Just makes life better when you sit back and enjoy it. Yeah, exactly. Like, if you don't like something and you might have to put up with it, that's fine. But you don't need to dwell on it all day long. Don't be lost in your thoughts and finding things that you dislike or hate. And I realize the irony in this, that we're suffering together through Thoreau, who we have all probably decided that we're not a great fan of. I realize the irony, but there is still good to be had in this. We're having good conversations and having good thoughts, spurred perhaps by a person who's a pretentious asshole, but absent the person, the thoughts themselves, though couched in horrible rhetoric, are worth it. And yes, we started it, we have to finish it. We don't leave projects half finished. That's just not right. It's not right. But alright guys, speaking of finishing, it is past 10 o'clock. I am winding down and looking forward to finishing this bottle of wine, and I kind of assume you guys would rather not sit around as I've gotten a little bit too deep into my cups. So we will wrap it up for the evening and we will resume tomorrow. We are about 60% of the way through this book. We probably have about another 3 nights. So I expect by next weekend we'll be wrapping up on Thoreau. We've got tomorrow, Tuesday, and probably either Friday or Saturday we'll finish, depending on the timetables and the flows. Some of these chapters that you sort of feel the passion rising up, you can get through them more quickly. And others, you've got a paragraph in a page, and that just drags on and on and on. One of these days, I'll just let go 3 sheets to the wind and have a bonus hour after we've continued to drink on and on and on through the night together. But that's not for tonight. We'll see. So, all right, guys, thank you very much for joining us, and we will resume tomorrow with our next reading, the 5th session of Thoreau's Walden, where we will probably be complaining about him even more. I mean, what would a reading be if we weren't grousing over someone who's been 100, 200 years dead? That's pretty fun, right? All right. Have a great night, everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye now.